Okay, I think we should be live. Hope you're doing well and hope everybody's having a great day. One other just housekeeping note, we're just a few weeks away from Shavuos and we're going to encourage everyone to come join us for Shavuos. You should have a great program planned, lots of classes, and it looks like we'll be having some type of barbecue or food where you can reserve for that as well. So that's just another way we're trying to make coming back as enticing and as inviting as possible, but obviously continuing to be safe and continuing to take this process slowly. So what I want to spend some time on is there's a holiday coming up on Thursday night. Does anybody know what that holiday is? Going once, going twice. It has to do with the Omer. It has to do with something being the 33rd day of the Omer. It's Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. It's an exciting day. Some of us have the custom, for example, not to get haircuts or to have other morning practices, not to shave over the course of this time. And so after Lag BaOmer, a person is able to do those things. And it's a joyous time. And in a lot of communities, they have big parties and celebrations. They have bonfires. Like in Israel, like the kids there, I remember when my brother was growing up there in Israel. He's my younger brother. I grew up in Chicago. He grew up in Israel. When he was growing up, like already from before Pesach, the kids start collecting wood, any piece of wood they can find on the side of the road for their bonfires. And it's like, it's a really fun thing, and the whole country lights up in a beautiful way. And
I was in Israel on Lag BaOmer on the ocean, and I saw a few of those.
Yeah, well, we want everyone to obviously practice fire safety and to be safe, because there's invariably some people who do not do that, and that's not a good thing. But it's a joyous time, and what I want to explore is, what is the significance of Lag BaOmer? What is it all about? And what do we celebrate? What do we not celebrate? And so let's jump right in here. So the truth is that there is actually no mention in the Torah whatsoever about Lag BaOmer. There is the idea of Safarta Lecha Shavuot, that a person should count the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. We have this there, but there is not anything that says that the 33rd day is a holy day, right? We have Sfira, but there's nothing about that the 33rd day is something special or holy. Now, the Gemara in Yevamos does talk to us a little bit about this. This is like the source that we would use. Let me share it with you here. So take a look here. So this is the Gemara Yevamos. Maybe we've seen this over the years, hard to know. So Amru Shneim Asar Elef Zugim Talmidim Hayulo Rabbi Akiva. There were 12,000 pairs of students, so 24,000 students, so 12,000 chavrusas that Rabbi Akiva had. Megabat ad Antripus, the Kulan Metu Beperak Echad Mipnei Shalo Nagu Kavu Zelasa. That they lived from Givat to Antipatris, and they all died in one period of time. Why? Because they did not treat each other with respect. What does that mean, that they didn't treat each other with respect? What's that all about? They weren't kind to each other, right? They weren't nice. And so they died. We'll have to explore that further. V'haya ha'olam shameim. The world was desolate. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etzel rabotenu shebedarom. V'sana lahem Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. V'hem hemidu Torah otosha. It was desolate. There was no Torah in the world. There was nothing until Rabbi Akiva comes to the south. He goes south to be with the other rabbis there to teach them Torah. And the second group of students make up this other group, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. And these are the very students who end up upholding the Torah study for all time. It's almost like we're learning the story of Noach in our women's class. It's almost as if that after the destruction of these students, Torah was on the brink of being destroyed, that there was going to be no more Torah. These were the great progeny of Rabbi Akiva, a great sage. And so until Rabbi Akiva had the thought to go down south to continue teaching to these rabbis, no one knows what the Masorah, what our tradition would look like, until he got there and teach those students. And they would be the foundations and the pillars, like Noach, in a sense, was the foundation pillar from whom the world comes from. Rabbi Akiva and his students are like Noach and his children, and the world is repopulated, in this case, with Torah because of them. And Amar Rechama bar Abba, Vitem Rechia bar Avin. So there is an opinion here that that says, this is Rabbi Chama bar Abba says, some says Rabbi Chia bar Avin, that he taught that kulam metu mita ra'a, that they all died in a very, very bad way. Maihi, what was Rav Nachman asakra metu mepesach vadatzeret tanakulam. I think this is a mistake for some reason I think the Hebrew got all mixed up here. This is not the right text, but I'll read it in English because that's right. So it's taught that all of them died in the period from Pesach until Shavuos. It should read Tana Kulam Metu Pesach Vadatzeret, and then this part I don't know how that happened. Anyways, the bottom line is that they all died from Pesach until Shavuos, and the Gemara teaches that how did they die? So it was a terrible death. It was known as diphtheria. That's what it is. Others suggest that it wasn't diphtheria, but rather it was something more, that maybe the 12,000 students, this has to do with maybe the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Rabbi Akiva was a big supporter of Bar Kokhba, and maybe they died supporting his ideas. Leaving that aside, we know that these students all passed away. And so what is missing from this entire story in the Gemara? There's something that's big, that's missing. What would we expect the Gemara to tell us? Most people, if you ask my son, what do we celebrate in Lag BaOmer? He's going to say that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on the 33rd day of the Omer. And that's why on Lag BaOmer, we celebrate. We have a party because they stopped dying. Now, the truth is that does our Gemara say anything about that? There's no mention here whatsoever about students stopping to die or anything like that. It doesn't exist, right? In fact, it's only really until the 11th and 12th centuries where we start seeing a mentioning that 33rd day of the Omer being a time where people could get married. And the Meiri actually writes that is the first source really that suggests that there is a tie-in to the death of these students and the 33rd day of the Omer, Lag BaOmer. But it says here quite explicitly in the Gemara, Meitum Pesach v'Adatzeret, they died for all 7 weeks. From Pesach until Shavuos, they died. And some have the custom, by the way, to show mourning for the entire time. They don't stop their mourning. They won't get haircuts. They won't shave for 7 weeks. They will continue to mourn. They don't listen to music. They don't go to concerts and things like that. They continue to mourn for the entirety of this period for this reason. And again, it's just interesting. Some suggest that what's the significance of this 33rd day, that this is a time when people could get married? Actually, maybe it has nothing to do with the students of Rabbi Akiva. Some suggest it's a basic calculation that we know that there are 49 days, but of the 49 days, there are 15 days in which we don't say Tachanun. What are those 15 days? You have got 8 days of 7 days of Pesach, right? And you've got you have the 7 Shabboses. And then you also have, and you have a Rosh Chodesh, you also have Shavuos, it all adds up to 15 days. And so then when you add it all together, 49 minus 15 is 33. Yeah, right? 38, yeah. Well, I mean, the next day, the 34th day, that would get you to 49, right? So some suggest that when we say the 33rd day of the Omer, meaning until the next morning, the next day, the 34th day, right? So, in fact, the Shulchan Aruch quotes this. Again, there's no mention of this, really, there's no tradition. Look how the Shulchan Aruch codifies this law. Noagim, shelo listaper. What was that? So, Noagim, it was customary, shelo listaper ad Lag BaOmer. It was customary not to get haircuts until the 33rd day of the Omer. She'omrim sha'az pasku milamut, because that's the day that they stopped dying. Ve'en listaper ad yom lamed daled baboker. And a person shouldn't actually cut hair until the 34th day in the morning. Why? Unless the 33rd day of the Omer falls out on Friday. Because then you can cut your hair early because you're getting ready for Shabbos. I remember when I was growing up in high school, it was like a big thing in high school. Like you wanted to be able to show off that you can grow a beard or something. And so everybody would it was like a big thing, especially in high school, if you could have a full beard. I know we had nothing else going on in our lives. We were big losers. But in any case, so I remember on the 33rd day in the Omer, you had to wait till Chatzot, till afternoon. And then everyone would run to the dormitory and we would shave and do funny things and leave mustaches and mutton chops and all the funny, things you would do. But it always happened in the afternoon, nothing until after that. Because again, the Mechaber says, we try to wait. The only exception would be when it comes on Erev Shabbos. So on Erev Shabbos, we let Hagas or Masas Elu. in our times, in our countries, Rama disagrees and says you actually do it on the 33rd day. Umar bin bo ktsat simcha ve'ein omrim bo tachanan says a day of joy, but we don't say tachanan. Ve'en listaper ad lama gimel ba'atzma v'lo mi ba'erev. So he says we don't wait till the 34th day, but rather it's the 33rd day. But again, the same idea that we don't do it at night, we do it during the day. Mi, however, imchal b'yom achad nagim listaper b'yom vav lechavot Shabbos. So again, if the 33rd day comes on Sunday, again we would do it in Kavod Shabbos. Already on Friday, you can get a haircut. Now, so we see here from the Shulchan Aruch that it's a day. How does he describe it? It's a day she'esh bo ktsat simcha, a little bit of joy. Ve'ein omrim bo tachanan. It's a day where we don't say tachanan. This is the day. It's a joyous day, but it's not like a big party day, right? And so it's the only other tie into Lag BaOmer that exists, and this comes later in like the 16th and 17th century, is that the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai becomes a site of pilgrimage, and many mystics would go there for mystical practices, meditations. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if we go back to our Gemara here, Rabbi Shimon over here, he was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and he was a great sage. And the tradition was that he died on Lag BaOmer. That's the day he died, the 33rd day of the Omer. And some even suggest he was born also on that day. He was a very holy soul, and he lit up this world with light. And he's a very special person. And maybe that's the reason why we celebrate. Now, I just want to, now that we've kind of covered this, let me just quickly recap a few things here, just to make sure we're on the same page. So when we look back to the Gemara in Yevamos, for instance, it is strange that they refer to as, number one, 12,000 pairs of students, not 24,000 students. That's a weird thing to say. And we see here that it seems, according to most accounts, even the way the Mechaber brings it down, and based on the Meiri, that by and large, the reason that we celebrate Lag BaOmer is for really one reason, and that is because people stop dying. That's why, right? People stop dying, and we start to celebrate accordingly. Now, I would argue that this day would be a dark day. It wouldn't be a joyous day. It's strange to suggest that a day that people stop dying, that there would be a party. What would you expect to happen on the day that people stop dying?
You still have burials. You still have burials to do, and they stop dying. You still have people in mourning. Correct.
But the point is, think about, like, I don't want to compare it to the Holocaust, but we don't have a celebration of freedom from the Holocaust. We don't celebrate the end of the Holocaust. We commemorate. We remember the Holocaust. 24,000 people died. That's a lot of people who died. All the students, these are all the sages, they all died. All the students of Rabbi Akiva. So if anything, there should be a memorial we should have. It shouldn't be a day of simcha. It shouldn't be a day of, even if use the words the Rama, ktsat simcha, little simcha. It shouldn't be anything like that at all. It should be a day where we are mourning and recognizing and commemorating a period of mourning, not a day of celebration. Now, so how do we square that? Why is it then that it becomes a day of celebration? So I want to share with you two different approaches. The first is to focus on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rashbi, as he's known. Now, a few things about Rashbi. Well, let me actually share with you a very famous story of Rashbi. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he spoke critically of the Roman government, and it was later reported to the authorities. And so the Roman emperor goes and he sentences Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rav Elazar to death. And so the very, very famous story that he goes and he hides in a cave where they studied Torah day and night, and they were nourished miraculously through a carob tree and this, I guess like a spring of water is what you call it, and that had miraculously showed up in the cave. And after living there for 12 years in the cave, the emperor dies, and the death sentence gets lifted. And the Gemara in Shabbos explains, Eliyahu Hanavi comes to the cave, tells Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rav Elazar that it's safe to leave the cave. And sure enough, they go and they leave the cave. Now, I want to just make mention of this because I think it's just interesting, given our time period, that we spent the last year and a half in caves, right? We spent the last year and a half kind of cut off from everybody else and studying Torah in our homes away from everybody. We've been in a cave, just like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was. And it's just interesting to think about the coming back into society, the way that he comes back. Can you imagine what his reaction might have been to come back? We know how hard it's been for us. It's weird it could be uncomfortable to like shake somebody's hand or to get too close to somebody, right? We've only been away from each other for a year. Now imagine the social isolation that Rishon Bar Yochai had for these years, 12 years in alone in the cave. But amazing, the Gemara says that the transition from being inside the cave to being outside the cave, it takes place like, 1 second in one step, right? And we're like gradually opening up more, we're increasing the numbers. So it's just interesting to compare what is similar and dissimilar. I don't know which is better, like just going back to normal immediately or slowly ramping things up. But it's just something interesting to think about. But given that, I want to share with you the end of the Gemara about Rishon Bar Yochai, just so you can have a better sense here about what makes him so significant. So the Gemara here says in Shabbos, so they emerged from the cave. What happened after that? They saw people who were plowing and sowing. And Rishon Bar Yochai said, these people abandoned eternal life of Torah study and engaged in temporal life for their own sustenance. And the Gemara relates that every place that Rabbi Shimon and son Rabbi Elazar directed their eyes was immediately burned. If you are a fan of the superheroes, I think about like Cyclops from the X-Men, right? He just like everywhere he looks, he burns. So a divine voice emerges and says to them, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave. So they again went and sat there for 12 months. They said the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna lasts for 12 months. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. A divine voice emerged and said to them, emerge from your cave. They emerged, and everywhere that Rabbi Elazar would strike, Rabbi Shimon would heal. In other words, Rabbi Shimon was able to be on a higher level than his son. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, my son, you and I suffice for the entire world, as the two of us are engaged in the proper studies of Torah. That's what he has to say. So this just should give us a small inkling into the significance of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, one of the two interesting things about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we just studied this in the women's class earlier, and I mentioned the story of Noach and the flood. So the Torah, in the part of the covenant between God and Noach, and the covenant being the rainbow, is God promises that he will not bring down floods on the earth lidorot, for generations. And the word dorot is missing vavs. It's written just with the dots, dalad, like a cholam chaser, just a dot, dorot. And Rashi says, why is it written in this strange way, missing the vavs? Because the only time that the rainbow is shown is when God would have destroyed the generation. So whenever time we see a rainbow, it's really God saying, I would have wanted to destroy you, but I made a promise, so I'm not going to destroy the world through water. And so, but there are some generations where God never wants to destroy the world. And Rashi brings down the Medrash that says that one of these generations was the generation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the student of Rabbi Akiva. That's how great of a man he was. And yet, despite his greatness, how many halachos in Chazal do you think follow Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? If you had to guess. How many teachings do you think how many times do we follow him in practice?
Very few.
Who said very few?
Robert.
Why do you say very few, even though he was this great sage?
Because when he first came out of the cave and everything was burned from his sight, I think that's an insight into his way of poskening, I guess is the right word.
Okay, so you're saying that might be indicative. Well, it happens to be there's only one halacha that actually follows him, right? Davar she'eino miskaven follows Rishon Bar Yochai. I'm pretty sure there's no other halachas that follow his way, like practical halacha, which only, by the way, intensifies our question, which is, why do we mark the day of his death with some holiday? Like, what is the significance of that in our world? Like, why do we put focus on this if in the end, this is not a rabbi? Like, yeah, he was a great rabbi, a great sage, but why would we celebrate his death when we didn't learn anything from him, right? And so one possibility that I think could be meaningful for us is that we often look at Jewish law as being like the be-all, end-all, right? That whatever the halacha says, that's the truth, it's absolute. But the truth is that we need to keep in mind that there are times where we need to conduct ourselves in different ways, and there could be other truths or other ideas out there in the more mystical realms. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai excelled in this way. He was a mystic, right? Like I said before, we don't follow him in the practical realm, but we follow him in a spiritual, mystical sense. And it could be that while the halachos are not, according to Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in this world, we don't follow him in the halacha, but in the next world, we would, right? So we specifically, like the anniversary of his death is a day of simcha because his position isn't accepted in this world, right? We don't follow his vision for this world. We follow his vision for the world to come, right? That's where his more mystical ideas come from. Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is able to see the world in a different way. He saw the inner aspects of things, if you will, right? Which might be the more correct way, which is the more spiritual, the world to come way, right? So we're not meant to follow his method in this world, right? We're meant to follow that method in the more spiritual world. He was in a different, it was on a different plane than everybody else. And perhaps that really ties into what the celebration of Lag BaOmer is all about. In fact, there's a connection, I think the Torah brings it down, that there's a deep connection between the holiday of Purim and Lag BaOmer that also ties back to Pesach, that whatever day let me think of if I get this right. I think the 6th day of Pesach, whatever day the 6th day of Pesach is the same day of the week that Purim falls out on, the same day of the week that Lag BaOmer falls out on, if I'm correct. And so what's the connection then between Purim and Lag BaOmer, right? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that he could spare the entire world from judgment. But we also find, like I said, that there were no rainbows in his time. He lived his holy life, right? So Lag BaOmer, in a sense, is like Purim. Purim is a holiday that also tries to probe deeper into like the inner parts of humanity and removes all the external barriers, right? It's about giving gifts to each other, about showing our appreciation to Hashem. And we know that if Purim is, we say like Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, that Yom Kippur we should halavai, one day reach a level of Purim. So there's another idea that the Rebbe of San suggests that on Purim, we wish that we could be like Lag BaOmer, right? That on Lag BaOmer that we should be equipped with this inner vision that reassures us that everything's going to be all right, that there's nothing to be afraid of, that there is this mystical, spiritual part of everything. And that's a day, by the way, that is celebrated by and large by the regular people. Lag BaOmer is not a day that's celebrated by the quote unquote masses. The regular people celebrate it. So what is it that we're celebrating? Why are we celebrating death or the end of someone's life? It could be one possibility here is that we're celebrating really the mystical parts that Rashbi is guiding us into, that we should look to, that life goes well beyond just our actions, but there's much more a deeper inner sense to ourselves as well, a spiritual character, if you will. The second possibility has to do with Rabbi Akiva. And I think this also is meaningful. And we don't have a lot of time to get into it too deep, but we don't know, we know a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. We know, for example, that Rabbi Akiva, let me show you the Gemara over here. The Gemara says, what do we know about Rabbi Akiva? He was a shepherd for Kalva Savua. So when Ben Kalva Savua's daughter saw that he was modest and a fine character, she asked him, if I become betrothed to you, would you go to the academy and study Torah? And he said to her, yes. He betrothed her in secret and she sent him away to the academy. In other words, what do we know about Rabbi Akiva? He was a humble, kind person. That's all he was, humble and kind, right? His wife, soon to his bride, was someone who wasn't worried about the intellect or the genius that in a way would come. He would go learn Torah, and we know that he didn't know very much. He barely knew the alphabet. That's what Chazal teach us, right? And we see that they were incredibly poor. They had very little. They were very, very, Gemara Nedarim says, very, very humble people. But when we think about Rabbi Akiva, despite the fact that, yes, he ends up becoming this great scholar, what makes him special is not his chachma, it's not the scholarship, it's not the learning, it's the kindness and the humility. And that's significant because if you look at, this is a chart that I found, you look at the chart of Rabbi Akiva, he's right here in the middle. Notice how he is basically the grandfather of the entire Talmud. Everything comes from him, right? It all stops up to him. And then look at how many branches come out from him and where those other branches go, right? It funnels down from Rabbi Akiva all the way to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who is like a great grand Talmud of his, who ends up codifying the Mishnah and writing it down. And so what I want to suggest is that Rabbi Akiva, what we're celebrating is actually about Lag BaOmer. We're celebrating Rabbi Akiva's ability. Let's go back to the Gemara here. We're celebrating this man who is humble and simple and kind. We're not celebrating his greatness. Lag BaOmer is not about the fact that the students stopped dying on this day. Lag BaOmer is about this part right here, that he had the hope, the courage to sustain himself, to go Eitzel Rabotenu Shebedaron. He had the ability and the courage to go down south and to continue to teach Torah to them over there. He did not allow anything to stand in his way, even though he just lost all of his students. Let's go back to that comparison we made about Noach and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Noach didn't want to continue his life. He didn't want to procreate. When he saw the destruction of the world, it tore him apart. How does Rabbi Akiva react when he sees this? He has hope for the future. He doesn't let the fact that all of his students, his pairs of students, he doesn't let that stop him from continuing to teach Torah and ultimately become the grandfather of the entire Talmud. In other words, what I want to suggest, if we take both of these two different ideas about both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai together, is that Lag BaOmer is not a celebration of like Torah study. It's a celebration really about the things that exist deep within our souls, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the more mystical pieces, which for Rabbi Akiva was defined really as hope, right? This notion of hope, this notion of belief that there could be a better tomorrow. That yeah, sometimes the world doesn't go the way we want it to. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the halacha never followed him. Rabbi Akiva lost all of his students, but he always was able to see things in a positive way. He was a simple man, a humble man, a kind man. And when you have those character traits, then you're able to have humility, and that humility creates hope, and that hope ultimately breeds a future success for the people. Without Rabbi Akiva's hope, without his ability to have hope for the future, there wouldn't be the Torah that we know, like we saw in the Gemara in Yevamos. And that's, I think, a significant idea, especially in this time period, where, like I said, we are slowly emerging out from our shelters, from our own caves. We need to have hope for the future. We need to have hope that the world will get better, that will continue to get better. Because if we can't have hope, then we won't be able to leave our caves. We won't be able to move out. We have to believe. And if we believe, then God will help us hopefully with God's help, we'll be able to accomplish many great things, just like Rabbi Akiva did. And that's really what Lag BaOmer is all about. It's a day of simcha. It's a day of joy, not of mourning. It's a time for us to celebrate the hope and courage that Rabbi Akiva has. And we, especially during this time, should have that same hope and courage as well. Okay, so we will stop right here.
Yasher Koach.
Wish everybody a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.